On this episode of the world's biggest small group podcast, why is the Christian life so hard?
The divorce really came about because we were just pulling away from each other. It's hard to get through this.
I was one of those veterans that a few times tried to commit suicide just because I couldn't deal with the pain. I mean, my wife had been through thick and thin. I've been through a lot of hard times. Even when you're home, you're not the same husband anymore. You're here, but you're not. Your mind is still fighting a war.
I was really deep in my sickness, and I was having a hard time. And I just said, God, I can't do this without you. Because I just felt like I was seeing death. Every time I looked in the mirror, and my complexion was bad, and my hair was falling out, and I couldn't hold anything down. Everything was just really terrible.
You've just heard from Amber and Kevin and Angie, but you haven't heard the complete story. We're going to get to that as we go through the podcast today. But why is the Christian life so hard? That is our topic today, and I talk with Pastor Mike Tatlock about that very subject. I'm Pastor David, and this is the world's biggest small group podcast. Why is the Christian life so hard? That is the title of today's podcast here on the world's biggest small group. And I wrestled with how to start this podcast because in so many ways there is an assumption with that it is hard. But I want to set the expectation a bit by, this is where I wrestled. Let's just look at some people in Scripture and how hard their life was. Let's just start with Jesus. Betrayed, whipped, beaten, killed, but obviously rose again. But then look at the disciples. This is how they died. Peter was crucified upside down. Andrew was crucified on an X-shaped cross. James was beheaded. Philip was crucified. Nathanael was flayed alive and beheaded. Thomas was speared in India. Matthew stabbed by a sword. And it just goes on, stonings and being clubbed. This is a hard life we are called to. So how do we thrive in this abundant life that Jesus promised in today's world where we are swimming against a culture that compromises? So we're going to talk about that today with my guest, Mike Tatlock. Mike, welcome to the broadcast, or the podcast.
Thanks for having me. This has been a fun thing we've been talking about, so I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, Mike's written this particular book. It's called A Compelling Faith in a Compromising Culture.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to jump in and go to the end of the book.
Great.
All right. In my mind, I'm thinking, why is the Christian life so hard?
Yeah.
And you talk about this at the end of the book. Yeah. And it's almost like if you're following Jesus, it's supposed to be hard. Yeah. Do you want to jump off right at that point?
Yeah, I think that's funny because a lot of times we do a bait and switch. And we've done this for years where we try to get people to follow Jesus by painting this picture that, hey, life's going to be great. It's going to be amazing. He's going to take all your worries and problems away. People say yes to Jesus, and you get about 2 days into it, and you realize, wait a minute, where's this perfect life that I was promised? And that's not the way that Jesus set it up. And he sets up this beautiful contrast that we will have life to the full. Absolutely. But that doesn't mean life is going to be easy to the full. And one of the things we love to say is this, and this is the promise, is that Christ in us is greater than the chaos around us. So it's really about the inner life and what he wants to do to provide that source of life in us. But the thing is this, life, true life, always comes after death. And so that message doesn't always preach well, but it's actually the truth. And so when we share the whole gospel, it's really, yes, Jesus did all the work for us and we say yes to him and we are saved. But if we want to live the full life, that life, actually deep life with him, maturing, growth, thriving, flourishing life comes as we die to self. So we got to preach a lot more messages about dying to self for people to really get that.
Which is not an easy topic.
It's not.
It doesn't bring in the masses, as they say.
No. Can you imagine a billboard on the side of our church as the freeway? Come hear a message, die to self. I mean, would people be lined up? Probably not, but they would leave going, wow, that's actually what I really needed to hear.
I actually knew a church that one time, no joke, this was a few years ago, the city had them take it down, but they had a sign on their church that said living sacrifices offered Sundays at 9 and 11.
Oh, I like that. Actually, I like that. Somebody made him take it down.
They did, because they were like, what are you doing over at this church? Okay, so let's back up from that.
Yeah.
If we're kind of jumping to the end of the call on the Christian is to come and die to yourself.
That's right.
Why do we think otherwise? Like, what are the things that get in the way? You've written about this in the book, and you start with kind of how we got here.
Yeah.
So walk us through the process of that. How did we get to the point that we almost think life should be easy?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes with the title of the book too, because that word compromise, I didn't even know this. When you think about the word compromise, I think when my wife and I want to go out to dinner and she wants Mexican, I want Chinese, and then we end up going fighting which one are we going to compromise with, and it's McDonald's. You know, it's something in between that none of us are really happy with, but we had to find some agreement. We think of compromise more in trying to navigate conflict in relationships, but that word compromise, its root word. I just learned this a few years ago. The root word for compromise, because the word compromise has the word promise in it. And so the root word means to make an agreement with the wrong promise. And I think anytime you look at our lives where there's been a compromise, where we've drifted from the plan that God has for us, or we've drifted from that deep relationship with Him, that compromise in our life, it usually has at its root where we've made a wrong agreement with the wrong promise. And we know this, that Satan from the very beginning is a liar. We know the world loves to overpromise and underdeliver. And so I think part of the challenge for us starts with the question, what promises are you making agreements with? And the world will tell you, make the promise or make the agreement with the promise that life is supposed to be easy, life is supposed to be comfortable, life is supposed to be all around you, you're the center of that. And so that actually has bled into even our churches, our sermons, our theology, where we make the Christian life about me. And it's all about self-centeredness. Well, what we've done with that, we've made an agreement with the wrong promise. So when Jesus said that you would have life to the full, He also said that if you want to be my disciple, you got to pick up your cross daily. For me, it's like second by second, I got to pick up the cross, because everything inside of me, my own, what the Bible calls flesh, that's everything inside of me has this bent towards me. That's what sin does. Sin says you're the center of it. That goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, when you find Adam and Eve in the garden. And what did Satan do? Satan said, don't trust the promises of God. He's not trustworthy. Look to yourself. And that whole conversation started this ripple effect on earth, where now I think the biggest core issue with sin is that we are tempted to make agreements with the wrong promises. And so if I'm agreeing with my flesh that wants to make everything about me, my own flesh can promise things. My own flesh wants to say, Mike, take it easy, make things about comfort, make God revolve around you. Mm-hmm. So I can adopt a whole theology that puts me at the center, doesn't put Jesus at the center.
Well, you talk about that, and I all kind of highlights in chapter 3 of the book about idols. And one of the idols, as you've already talked about, is the self. But you've listed a bunch of other ones.
Oh, yeah.
The idol of comfort.
Yes.
I mean, that seems to be, unfortunately, even in the church, kind of the goal.
Absolutely. Well, David, you've traveled all around the world. I love your stories when you come back, because I think if anybody that I know that's had some of the most global awareness of God moving is you. You have traveled everywhere. You've been right at the epicenter of moves of God. And one of the things that I've seen, and I know you've seen, particularly when you go into countries where there's persecution, why do we ask, why is the church thriving there? It's an interesting phenomenon when you think about it, that some of the places in the world where believers have it the hardest, they thrive the most. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes hand in hand, because really what's happening is we're living with the decision of, is he worth it? Is he worth dying to self? I mean, that's really what worship even is. Worship is a decision to say he's worth it. I mean, we call it worthship, right? And so when we say that he's worth it, every one of those disciples you mentioned on there that gave their life as a martyr, they made the decision that he's worth it, that greater is him in us than what's going on with the evil in the world. And so that inner life of Christ is really worth dying to self because of what we gain. And you see this with James chapter 1, which it gets quoted all the time, so people might be familiar with it. It's an odd verse to start a whole book. I mean, it really is. It's like a sermon series. Do we really want to start with this? But he says, count it all joy when you face trials of various kinds. And then he goes on to say, then your faith will be tested. And that's usually where we stop. And we kind of go, yeah, this is an absurd saying. Why would you count it joy in the midst of trials? Is he talking about fake it till you make it? Because if you follow on just a few lines later, he says, as your faith is tested, then you'll be mature, complete, and not lacking anything. This is where that phrase, no pain, no gain, comes from. It actually is biblical, because through our trials, what's happening is our tendency to be self-centered begins to die more. And as we die more, he lives more in us. And as Christ lives more in us, we do experience more of the deeper, abundant, thriving, flourishing life that he created for us. So at the end of the day, I might be my worst enemy. I might be the one holding me back from actually the promises of Jesus in my life. And so going through trials is absolutely difficult. We're not minimizing that at all. It's horrible. There's pain, there's agony and trauma, but what we can experience in the midst of that can be the most beautiful fruit-bearing seasons of our life, maturing, becoming more like Christ, experiencing his presence, experiencing his power. And those moments he can turn from pain to his gain, if I could say it that way, in our lives.
So to come up against this compromising culture, which is hard,
yes,
as I like to say, the current of culture is strong.
Yeah.
You talk about abiding.
Yeah.
Abiding is an amazing concept, but hard to do, to rest in God's presence. But that really is how you start to stabilize your life in this. So let's talk about abiding. You talk about the different things that abiding does, the benefits of that. And one is that it starves the flesh and feeds the spirit. Talk more about that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I grew up in the church. I grew up a Christian since I was a kid, and John 15 talking about this abiding thing. I go, well, I don't know what that means. What does this mean to abide? And it's a pretty interesting verse because, or chapter, when you read through that, it's all about this imagery of a vine and branches and fruit that are being born. And you go, okay, I want to have fruit. And you think about the fruit of the Spirit: love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, self-control. I mean, it goes, sign me up for all of those. I would love to have all of those. But then you have to ask the question, well, what's the path in which he bears fruit? And it's through abiding, which again, that word, I was wondering, what does that mean? And the imagery helps us. It's a branch connected to a vine. And we know that a branch can only be sustained because of its connectedness to the vine, the nourishments and the nutrients that pass through it. And so we know that abiding, or some of the words used, is to remain. And what that says in John 15 is, as we abide, it actually says we can do nothing apart from him. I'm like, wow, that's sobering to think about. I can do nothing apart from him. And he says at the end of that, as we abide, he says, so that our joy may be full. But he also mentions pruning. So I set up with the nice part. Yeah, well, sign me up for the fruit. Love the fruit. Fruit's great. Oh, joy to the full. Max out on joy. Sign me up. Interesting that he uses joy there in the same way that James uses joy. And we know that it's a fruit of the Spirit, meaning that it's supernatural. It has to be something he bears in us. I can't conjure up joy. That could be a pseudo joy or an imitation, but true joy that can happen in the midst of hard seasons is truly supernatural. It really does come from him. And you talk with people who've walked through hard, painful, agonizing seasons who've experienced this, and it's compelling. I mean, you look at them and you go, wait, are they being, what reality are they living in? They're going through some of the most horrible things, and yet when they speak as this sense of God's presence and his joy that you almost are kind of going, is this a scam? Is this legit? Mm-hmm. It's real. And they would tell you, only God's doing that. I can't do that. I'm not working this up. I'm not conjuring this up inside of me. It is truly God's presence and joy. But he talks about pruning. And pruning doesn't always sound fun. I mean, the imagery of it, being cut off. But he promises there that the pruning only happens so that more fruit can be born. And so oftentimes, God's not the creator of evil. God does not create evil. I get asked that question as a pastor all the time. Why do bad things happen to good people? As if God is sitting pulling the lever on all the bad things in our lives, that almost a little bit like he's sadistic. And some people think that. They go, well, God made these evil things happen. God is not the author of evil. But what he will do is he will allow, in his sovereign plan, he will allow hard things to happen in trials. And he will allow things for a season in our lives so that those things can bear good fruit. And what even the evil means, or what mankind doing evil things can intend, God can bring good out of those things. We see that from the very beginning of Scripture to the cross. What an ultimate picture of man and the enemy intending harm, and yet the greatest good came from it. So that's what he does. He turns evil, he turns bad into good things for his glory. And those good things is our maturity, our growth, our deeper encounter and experience with him.
And I think as we go through some of those trials, those hard things, you get through them. And I have learned that you don't see the goodness of it except in your rearview mirror.
That's a great saying.
Because then you're going, oh, God did take care of me back then.
Yeah.
And it was hard. But now I see, whereas those are only things typically fully understood in hindsight.
Absolutely.
And so as we now have to engage into a culture, because you talk about not backing away from this, even though life is hard as a Christian.
Right.
And honestly, the deeper you go with Jesus, sometimes the harder it's going to get.
Right. Yep.
So how do we, as you say, not escape culture, but engage culture?
Yeah. I think one of the things that, this word compelling that we talk about in the title of the book, the word compelling, it reminds me of when Peter said, always be ready to give an answer. Or some translations would say defense, where we get the word apologetics, apologia. He says, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have. And it implies when Peter wrote this, the church was going through hard times. I mean, it even says in Peter, like, don't be surprised by the fiery ordeal that you're going through. And most people hear that and they think that's symbolic. He was referring to human sacrifices. I mean, this was during times of emperors where they were lighting Christians on fire in the arenas and coliseums to make a mockery of them, to one thing. And so when he was saying, don't be surprised by the fiery ordeals you're going through, that was the backdrop of first century believers. I mean, it cost them everything to believe.
It was literally fire.
It was literally fire.
Yeah.
So then he says, Peter says, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have. What he's saying, though, it's interesting. It implies I live in such a way that someone would ask me. That's what compelling means. How do I live as a follower of Jesus through the fiery, now symbolic trials of my life, where I still carry this message of hope? I'll remember when we did, this is a fascinating story. I'll share this real quick. During COVID, when COVID first broke out, in the first probably about month, when everybody, where's this going? What's happening? And I remember they took the Portland Trailblazers, the whole NBA had to go into what was called the bubble, and they tried to quarantine them down in Florida. And I mean, this was a complete disruption. And everybody's going, what are we doing? What's happening? The whole world is turning upside down. And during that time, I got a phone call, being the chaplain for the Trailblazers.
I was going to say, one thing I didn't say is that Mike is not only my pastor, but the chaplain for the Portland Trailblazers. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't bring that up at the beginning. But
that'll connect a little dot here, which one of the things that I saw, this is wild. So I get a phone call from one of the post-game producers. After every game, they do a whole TV show and they talk and they break down analytics of the game and best plays and all that kind of stuff. I don't follow any of those things. People always ask me. I don't know any stats. But he called me and he said, hey, we're right in the middle of a global pandemic. World seems really crazy. People are afraid. People are scared. They don't know what's going on. He said, Mike, you're the team chaplain. Would you come on and talk about hope? I said, well, anytime anybody's going to ask me to come anywhere and talk about Jesus, like that's a given. I said, well, I won't be able to talk about any sport. I don't know any statistics, but I'll talk about Jesus and hope. So I went on the program and we talked about how do you find hope in times like this? And I used, again, that same phrase, Christ in us is greater than the chaos around us. And it's the perfect picture of Jesus, who was in the boat when the storm came up with the disciples. And where'd they find him? He's sleeping in a storm. And he gets up and silences the storm. But you go, wow, Jesus knew the secret to inner peace when there was outer chaos. And that's part of the Christian life, is that you can actually have that. Now, that has to be matured. That has to be grown. That has to be developed. That's not something that always happens overnight. But that is the end game and goal, is that Christ wants us to mature and grow. And just like every trial we go through, it's a pathway of breadcrumbs, that every trial leads us to deeper contentment, deeper joy, deeper peace that only can come from him on the inside. So we do this podcast on hope on the show, and we get done. He calls me the next day. He goes, our viewing and response was so high. We didn't even talk about sports. He said, would you come back and do a second segment to that? He goes, people are hungry for hope. And I said, well, everybody is. And I said, so what makes it compelling is for us as Jesus followers, that when we go through life and things are hard, and that doesn't mean that we put on this facade that, hey, everything's good, I'm not crying, I'm not hurt. No, that's the opposite of that. It's this sucks. This is hard. This is horrible what I'm going through. And yet I'm choosing to trust God, and I'm choosing to abide. And that's that root word for abide means to trust deeply. And you see from the beginning of the Bible to the end that every journey really comes down to that question. Do I really trust God enough that in the midst of the hard things, he's going to do something good with me, in me, through me, and for me? And I think that as we engage our culture, to come back to your question, when we have that frame of mind, that now allows us to be a different perspective for others who are walking through hard things, for others who are going through their own trials and struggles. And they're going, I don't understand how do you navigate this? When Paul talked about families that were losing, he said that we have this great hope that we will see loved ones who believe in Christ in heaven. And he said that we don't grieve like the world grieves, but he still says we grieve. He still says that when you lose a loved one in Christ, you know that someday you're going to see them. There's going to be this great reunion in heaven with them. So we still grieve, though. We just grieve differently. And I think that's what's compelling is we go through trials just like anybody goes through, and we cry and we get angry and we get hurt. But in the midst of those things, who we go to and how our trust in Christ is reflected in us becomes incredibly curious to a world going, we have nowhere to turn in the midst of these times. That's compelling.
So why is the Christian life so hard? Some of it is expectation, as we've talked about already, but obviously we've gotten a lot of hope. Mike, thank you so much for giving us all that perspective. I'm gonna give a couple of quick things here, if I may. This is the book. It's called a Compelling Faith in a Compromising Culture. And I just found out before we sat down to record this that there are study questions that we're going to make available on the World's Biggest Small Group. I didn't know that. So as you watch this or listen to this, we'll make that available on worldsbiggestsmallgroup.com, that you can go through those questions, study this deeper, and hopefully, as a result of this, able to weather the storms, not just weather them, but as you talked about, live a life in such a way that people ask the question to which the gospel is the answer.
That's right.
That's the ultimate end, that we go out and make disciples because we ourselves are getting closer and closer with Jesus.
That's it. Absolutely.
So, Mike, thanks for being here so much.
Thanks for having me, David. It's been a lot of fun.
At the beginning of the podcast, I introduced you to Amber, Kevin, and Angie. Let's go back to those stories to see how God came through even when life is hard. Now, Amber was headed for a divorce, but then God did something amazing and convicted her of something.
I need to stay in this marriage. I need to continue pursuing my faith and commitment that God had solidified in this marriage and not walk away from this marriage.
Kevin is a veteran who still deals with PTSD. But God has been doing some amazing things to get him through and give him an amazing perspective on suffering.
It's for a reason. It's a season of hardship so that I can grow, so that I can be more humble, so that I can appreciate what I have. So I just encourage everyone to just lean on God. Tell him your problems. He will respond. It might not be by words. You might not hear his voice, but he will show you what he's capable of, because he is a loving God. And his love is unconditional.
Amber was fighting a disease that the doctors couldn't quite figure out. And yet through that suffering, she came to the conclusion exactly like we've been talking about today on the podcast.
When you're that close to feeling like you're going to die, your focus on your body just kind of becomes less. And your focus on your relationship with the Lord, your trust in him becomes number one. And I completely surrendered to God. I completely surrendered everything to him. And it was the first time since I had gotten sick that I actually felt like I had real hope. Real hope.
Now, before we close out the podcast for today, just a real quick note that we have a special Bible study that we've put together for this topic about why the Christian life can be so hard. It's a study called Following Jesus. And to get a hold of that particular Bible study, just text the word follow to 67101, and we'll shoot you a link, and you can get that study to take this one step further. The other thing that you can do is, if you need prayer, we're available to you. I mean, we are the world's biggest small group, so our prayer team is ready if you need prayer, because life is hard, and the Christian life can especially be hard. So if you need prayer, our prayer team can take your call between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. Central Time when you call 281-652-5555. That's the number on your screen. So thank you for joining us here on the podcast today. Just remember, you were never meant to do life alone. You're part of this place called the World's Biggest Small Group. So check out over 50 Bible studies, other podcast topics at worldsbiggestsmallgroup.com. World's Biggest Small Group is a ministry of Hope Media Group, and it is presented to you completely free, powered by generosity. Thank you so much for watching.